Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and support me.
The wind howled around the stone towers of Hogwarts, a sound that blended seamlessly with the rustling leaves of the forbidden forest beyond. Harry Potter lay awake in his four-poster bed, staring up at the ceiling, his thoughts tangled like the shadows cast by the flickering firelight. The dreams had started 2 weeks ago, dreams so vivid and strange that he couldn't shake them off. Even after waking, he saw water crashing against rock, flames dancing wildly in the air, and most disturbingly, a figure cloaked in shadow, clutching a large, ancient book. The figure's fingers dripped with power, commanding the very elements themselves. Harry shuddered at the memory and pulled his blanket up to his chest. He tried to convince himself that they were just nightmares. After all, he'd been through enough in the last few years to warrant some unsettling dreams. But deep down, he knew there was something more to Ida, something dangerous, something tied to the dark forces gathering around him. His scar prickled slightly, and he winced. Voldemort, the name swirled through his mind, even though he tried to banish it. Was it possible that the Dark Lord had found another way to slip into his thoughts? He had learned to close off his mind after his previous encounters, but this felt different. It felt ancient, like the power came from something even older than Voldemort himself. A soft rustle from the bed next to his made him sit up. "Harry?" Ron's voice was muffled by his pillow, but the concern in it was clear. "Yeah? Another one of those dreams?" Ron asked, sitting up and rubbing his eyes. The faint glow from the fire illuminated his face, tired but alert. Harry nodded. "It's getting worse. It's not just random flashes anymore. I keep seeing the same thing at this book. I don't know. There's something off about it." Ron yawned and swung his legs over the side of the bed. "Maybe it's just stress. You've got a lot going on, mate." "Could be nothing." Harry bit his lip, unsure. But before he could reply, there was a knock at the door, followed by Hermione's hushed voice. "Harry?" "Ron? Are you awake?" The door creaked open slightly, and Hermione's bushy hair appeared in the gap, her expression serious. She had clearly been waiting for the right moment to speak to them. "I found something in the library that you need to see," she whispered, stepping into the room. Ron groaned softly. "Hermione, it's the middle of the night. Can't it wait until morning?" "No," she replied firmly, her eyes flashing. "It's about Harry's dreams that got their attention." Harry and Ron exchanged glances before Harry nodded for Hermione to continue. "I've been looking into ancient magic," Hermione said, lowering her voice as she sat on the edge of Harry's bed. "And I think your dreams might be connected to the Book of Four Elements. It's something I came across in one of the older volumes in the restricted section. It's said to be a book that contains the secrets to controlling the four elements of earth, water, fire, and air." The book was thought to be lost centuries ago, but if your dreams are showing it to you, she trailed off, biting her lip. "It might not be lost after all." Harry felt a cold chill run down his spine. The idea of an ancient book that controlled the elements, especially one tied to his strange dreams, was unnerving. "What does it mean?" "Why would I be dreaming about it?" "I don't know for sure," Hermione admitted, "but it's possible that the book is hidden somewhere in Hogwarts. If that's the case, it could explain why Voldemort hasn't found it yet." "But if you're dreaming about it, Harry, that means some Enya or something is trying to reach you." "Brilliant," Ron muttered. "More ancient dark magic to deal with. Just what we needed." Hermione shot him a glare before turning back to Harry. "We need to figure out where this book is before someone else does. If it really holds the power of the elements, it could be catastrophic if it fell into the wrong hands." "Like Voldemort," Harry finished grimly. "Exactly," Hermione said. "We don't have much time." Over the next few days, the trio threw themselves into their research. Between classes, Quidditch practice, and the looming pressures of their 5th year, they spent hours in the library, poring over every mention of the Book of Four Elements they could find. Hermione's face grew more drawn with each passing day as she skimmed through old scrolls and dusty tomes, while Ron became increasingly frustrated with the lack of concrete answers. "Maybe it's just a myth," Ron said one evening, slamming a book shut with a thud that echoed through the quiet library. "I mean, half the stuff in these books is rubbish anyway." "It's not a myth," Hermione snapped, her eyes flashing with determination. "There's too much evidence pointing to its existence. We just haven't figured out where it is yet." Harry remained silent, staring down at his own open book without really seeing the words. His dreams were growing more intense, and now, they weren't just visions of the book. He had begun seeing places as dark tunnels, flickering torches, and massive stone doors etched with strange symbols. He could feel the heat of fire, taste the salt of seawater, and hear the howling winds. It was as if he was being pulled towards something, and that something was calling out to him. "We're missing something," Harry muttered, closing his eyes in frustration. "I can feel it. It's like I'm supposed to be there. Like I'm being shown the way." Hermione's head shot up, her brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" "I don't know," Harry said, shaking his head. "But I think these dreams aren't just warnings. They're clues. I keep seeing tunnels and doors with symbols. I think it's somewhere under Hogwarts." Hermione's eyes lit up with excitement. "Of course, that makes sense. The book was said to be hidden to protect it from dark forces. What better place to hide something like that than in the very foundations of the castle?" "But how do we get down there?" Ron asked, frowning. "The castle's got hundreds of secret passages. We could be looking for ages and not find anything." "That's where we come in," Hermione said, her expression growing serious. "I think I know a way to narrow it down." That night, Harry, Ron, and Hermione stood at the entrance to a little used corridor on the lower levels of Hogwarts. The Marauder's map clutched tightly in Harry's hand, its spidery ink revealing the twisting passages that snaked beneath the castle. But there was something strange about the map tonight, something it had never shown before. "There," Harry said, pointing to a spot near the edge of the map where the ink seemed to blur and flicker, as if something was trying to hide itself from view. "That's where we need to go." Ron peered over his shoulder, his brow furrowing. "That's not on any of the maps we've used before." "How did you find it?" Harry didn't have an answer. He had just known, as if the map had revealed itself to him because he needed to see it. "Come on," Hermione urged, leading the way down the dimly lit corridor. "We don't have much time." They descended deeper into the castle, the air growing cooler and more still with each step. The stone walls around them seemed to close in, and the flickering light from their once cast long shadows that danced eerily across the floor. After what felt like hours, they finally reached the entrance to a large, circular room, its walls lined with ancient runes that pulsed faintly with a soft blue light. At the center of the room stood a massive stone door, its surface covered in intricate carvings that depicted the four elements in vivid detail: flames curling around waves of water, winds swirling through rocky mountains. "This is it," Hermione whispered, her voice tinged with awe. "The door to the Book of Four Elements." Harry stepped forward, his heart pounding in his chest. He could feel the magic emanating from the door, powerful, ancient, and dangerous. "How do we open it?" Hermione studied the carvings, her brow furrowed in concentration. "The elements are the key. We have to pass the trials of earth, fire, water, and air to unlock the door." "Great," Ron muttered. "Because we haven't had enough trials already this year." But there was no turning back now. Harry could feel the weight of the task before them, the enormity of the danger that lay ahead. Voldemort's forces were closing in, and the book at the power it held could not fall into the wrong hands. Taking a deep breath, Harry placed his hand on the door, and the first trial began. Harry's hand rested on the door, and the instant he made contact, the carving shifted. The images of fire, water, earth, and air moved as if alive. A low rumble echoed through the chamber, sending a shiver up Harry's spine. The ground beneath them trembled, and then the door glowed with an eerie light before splitting open with a deep, grating sound. Without a word, Harry stepped through, followed closely by Ron and Hermione. The air was thick with magic, and as they entered, the world around them shifted, pulling them into a different space altogether. The stone room disappeared, replaced by a vast, open landscape. The ground beneath their feet was solid, but it felt more like walking on a thin sheet of rock atop something unfathomable. In the distance, massive mountains rose, their jagged peaks piercing a sky full of swirling clouds. There was no sun, but the world was bathed in a dull, golden light. Harry's heart raced. He could feel the weight of the place, yet the magic of the elements was all around them. He knew this was the first trial. As they stood there, the ground began to quake again, this time more violently. The mountains rumbled, and the earth beneath them cracked open, revealing a wide chasm that stretched far into the horizon. From the fissure, massive columns of rock began to rise, forming a sort of bridge across the chasm. But the stones were unstable, shaking with every tremor. "We have to cross," Harry said, his voice steady despite the fear gnawing at him. Ron glanced nervously at the shifting stones. "You're joking, right?" "No," Hermione said firmly. "This is the first trial at the Trial of Earth. We have to make it across without falling. The elements are testing us. If we fail, broken bar." She didn't need to finish the sentence. Without hesitation, Harry led the way, stepping onto the first stone. It trembled beneath his weight, but it held. He took another step, and then another. Behind him, Ron muttered something under his breath but followed, while Hermione, her wand at the ready, stayed close behind. The wind picked up as they moved, howling through the chasm and rattling the stones. Every step was precarious. The path was narrow, barely wide enough for them to walk side by side, and the stones rocked back and forth as if they might collapse at any moment. About halfway across, the ground beneath Harry shifted more violently than before. He stumbled, arms flailing, trying to keep his balance. For a moment, it seemed like he was going to fall, but Hermione grabbed his arm and steadied him. "Careful," she warned, her voice tight. They continued, their progress slow but steady. The chasm below seemed endless, a black void that threatened to swallow them whole if they made even one wrong step. Sweat dripped down Harry's brow as he concentrated, placing each foot carefully, determined not to lose his balance again. But then, just as they reached the final stretch, the ground beneath Ron gave way. With a shout, he fell, his hands scrabbling for purchase on the edge of the stone. Harry's heart leapt into his throat as he lunged forward, grabbing Ron's arm just in time. "I've got you!" Harry shouted, straining to pull Ron up. Hermione hurried over to help, and together they dragged Ron back onto the stone. Ron panted heavily, his face pale. "I'm never doing that again," he muttered. Harry didn't answer. He just gave Ron a reassuring pat on the shoulder before standing and leading them the rest of the way across. When they finally reached solid ground again, Harry exhaled in relief. The chasm behind them sealed itself as if it had never existed. The ground beneath them was still now, the trembling of the earth gone. They had passed the Trial of Earth. Before they could catch their breath, the wind picked up again, stronger this time. It roared through the landscape, whipping at their robes and howling like a living thing. The sky darkened, and the golden light was replaced by an ominous gray. "The next trial," Hermione said, her voice barely audible over the wind. "Air." No sooner had she spoken than the wind intensified, forming a violent cyclone in the distance. It spun with incredible speed, tearing up the ground and pulling rocks and debris into its swirling vortex. The cyclone moved toward them, growing larger and more ferocious with every passing second. Harry's heart pounded. "We need to move." They sprinted toward a nearby outcropping of rocks, the only shelter in sight. But the cyclone was too fast. Before they could reach cover, it was upon them, its force nearly lifting them off their feet. Harry grabbed hold of a large rock, clinging to it for dear life as the wind roared around them. He could see Hermione and Ron doing the same, their faces pale and strained with effort. The wind tugged at him, trying to pull him into the cyclone's deadly embrace. His grip slipped, and for a terrifying moment, Harry thought he was going to be swept away. But then he remembered something, a spell he had learned in his defense against the dark arts class last year, arresto momentum. He shouted, pointing his wand at himself. Instantly, the wind's pull weakened, and Harry's body slowed, anchored to the spot. He saw Ron and Hermione do the same, and together they held their ground against the cyclone's fury. But the trial wasn't over yet. The cyclone was still growing, and its winds were becoming more violent by the second. Harry knew they couldn't just wait it out. They had to act. "Follow me," he shouted over the wind, his voice barely audible, using the arresto momentum spell to keep themselves from being swept away. They began moving toward the center of the cyclone. It was a dangerous plan, but Harry could feel that the only way to defeat the trial was to confront it head-on. As they approached the heart of the storm, the winds became almost unbearable. Debris flew past them, and the air was thick with dust and dirt. But Harry kept moving, determined not to let the trial defeat them. When they finally reached the center, Harry raised his wand, his voice steady and commanding. "Finite incantatum." For a moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, the cyclone began to weaken. The winds died down, and the swirling debris settled. Within seconds, the storm was gone, leaving only a calm, clear sky in its wake. They had passed the trial of air. Panting and exhausted, Harry, Ron, and Hermione collapsed onto the ground, grateful for the brief respite. But they knew it wouldn't last long. 2 trials down, 2 to go. The next trial came without warning. One moment the sky was clear, and the next, dark clouds rolled in, and rain began to pour down in sheets. The ground beneath them turned to mud, and the temperature dropped sharply. "Water," Hermione said, her voice barely above a whisper. The rain intensified, quickly turning into a torrent. Within moments, the ground was flooded, and the water was rising fast. They had to move, or they would be swept away. But the water wasn't just rising, it was attacking. From the flood emerged serpentine shapes made entirely of water, their bodies twisting and writhing as they surged toward the trio. Harry raised his wand, ready to defend himself, but Hermione grabbed his arm. "No, we can't fight them. The elements aren't meant to be defeated by force. We have to outsmart them." "But how?" Ron asked, his voice panicked as the water serpents closed in. "We need to use their strength against them," Hermione said, her mind racing. "Water flows, it doesn't resist. We need to move with the current, not against it." Harry understood. They couldn't fight the water. They had to become a part of it. Taking a deep breath, Harry stepped forward, letting the water wash over him. The serpents hesitated for a moment, as if confused by his lack of resistance. Then, slowly, they began to dissolve, their bodies merging with the flood. Ron and Hermione followed suit, and within moments, the water had calmed. The flood receded, and the serpents were gone. They had passed the trial of water. The air was still now, and the landscape around them had returned to its previous state. Harry, Ron, and Hermione stood there, soaking wet but alive, their hearts still pounding from the adrenaline of the trials. They knew the final trial was coming, at the trial of fire. As if in response to their thoughts, the ground beneath them began to heat up. Flames flickered to life around them, quickly growing into a roaring inferno. The heat was intense, and the flames seemed to be closing in, threatening to consume them. But Harry wasn't afraid. He could feel the power of the elements coursing through him now, guiding him. The trials weren't meant to destroy Emma, they were meant to test their understanding. Harry stepped forward, raising his wand. Incendio. The flames surged toward him, but instead of burning, they danced around him, swirling in a beautiful, controlled spiral. Harry could feel the fire responding to his command, bending to his will. Ron and Hermione watched in awe as Harry guided the flames, directing them away from their path. The fire roared, but it did not harm them. It was under Harry's control. With one final flick of his wand, Harry extinguished the flames. The air around them cooled, and the trial was over. They had passed the final test. Exhausted but victorious, Harry, Ron, and Hermione stood at the entrance to a new chamber. The door before them opened with a soft creak, revealing a stone pedestal in the center of the room. And there, resting on the pedestal, was the Book of Four Elements. Harry stepped forward, his heart pounding in his chest. He could feel the power radiating from the book, ancient and dangerous. But he knew what had to be done. This book couldn't fall into the wrong hands. As he reached out to take the book, a voice echoed through the chamber. You have proven yourself worthy. The elements are yours to command. Use their power wisely. Harry hesitated for a moment, then grasped the book. The room around them pulsed with energy, but the power was calm now, at peace. They had done it. The trials were over, and the Book of Four Elements was Sophia for now.